seem to run into each other at conferences a lot.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight, I should say back here again, because it was 10 years ago since I was here last time, which is when we led your strategic plan for 2016. And so I'm happy to be here to talk tonight about what the process looks like and how we've done a little bit of change over time. Pam was the only person who was on the board the last time around, so all of you are new to our process. In your folder on the left-hand side, you have a copy of the materials. I believe you have electronic copies of the cover letter and the proposal. And then on the right-hand side, you have the presentation that we're using this evening. So I just want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what our process looks like, and that you have opportunity to ask any questions. And by all means, you know, I sat at that board table for 15 years myself, and so some of your questions may come on the drive home. You've got my contact information in here, so don't hesitate to reach out if you think of something later.
Not working, the up arrow's not working? Oh, there we go.
Okay. All right, so I thought it's always a good place to start is why do we even talk about strategic planning? What is it about that process that really fits well within the work of school boards? Well, in the early 2000s, there was,
Yeah, that's me.
in the early 2000s, there was research done by our colleagues in Iowa, because believe it or not, there have been all kinds of studies around the kind of impact that principals and teachers and superintendents could have on student achievement, but never any research about how boards had a positive impact. And so they took it upon themselves to work with the Superintendents Association, their State Department of Ed, Iowa University, and a host of others. And they really distilled it down to say, if boards pay attention to these 5 areas and really zero in on them, they're going to have the greatest likelihood of having a positive impact on student achievement. All 5 areas are important, and all 5 are actually encompassed in a strategic plan, but primarily the one that we're going to talk about tonight is the setting of a vision, right? You've had a vision. I don't know if it's changed over the time since the last time that we did your plan, but that vision is one of the main components of any strategic plan. What is it that we want to be in our most desired state? And so, oops, I hit the wrong arrows each time. So once that vision is in place, along with the district goals, and we'll talk about how we would take a look at your current mission and vision and your belief statements that you are currently using. But you'll also develop district goals. And those goals actually just go down all the way through the district in all the work that's being done. So you'll see the key work and goals of the Board of Education. How is it that the board can support your goals that are identified in a strategic plan? One where the community comes together along with your staff and other partners that you would have. How do we support that work? And it's primarily through policy and budgets and those kinds of things. But we would take a look at ourselves as board members to say, what is it that we can do to impact and make sure that those goals move forward? You all know you use the MASB tool for superintendent evaluation, I believe. And so regardless of the tool you use, there's a component in there about, in the superintendent evaluation about progress towards district-wide goals, right? It was so important that the legislature put that in as part of the superintendent evaluation. And so we always suggest that the goals from the strategic plan are primarily the goals you would use in your superintendent evaluation. There might be something very specific you want the superintendent to work on, but primarily it would be moving the district forward, moving you towards that vision that had been identified. We also marry the plan to MyKIP. I know you're going to hear about MyKIP tonight, so I'm going to stay and listen to that to see what you have in place for that coming up. But we want to make sure that you don't have a strategic plan over here and a MyKIP plan over here, and they may or may not talk, they may or may not overlay. What we want to do is make sure that they work very closely together, because we want to narrow the focus and then deepen. And then all the rest of the staff in the district, regardless of the hat they wear, has a role to play in making the strategic plan a success. The work looks different, right, based on the hat that people wear and the responsibilities they have. But everybody's pulling together to move that plan forward. And that's honestly where the synergy of a strategic plan comes through. You've included and invited in so many members of your community that everybody owns it. You're not asking them to buy into a plan that was developed by a small group of people sitting at the board table. They actually helped create it. They can see the things in there that they may have suggested. And so it's a very different process where people buy into a plan versus they help create it and they own it. And again, that's where that synergy comes from. So I always like to tell people, strategic planning is really a roadmap, right? If we were to get into the car tomorrow and head off someplace, we probably wouldn't just start driving without knowing where it was that we were wanting to go, and we probably wouldn't start driving until we had made some plans, right? Maybe a budget, besides our destination, but maybe we would make lodging, maybe we would identify the attractions we were gonna see, all of those pieces and parts that make up the trip. It's the same thing with the strategic plan. Identify a destination, and then put a plan in measured steps in place to get there. And that's what it's all about. It's nothing crazy, secretive or odd. It's just a very laid out process. Here's where we wanna go, here's how we're gonna do it. So, there are some benefits. Obviously, you're looking at outside facilitators, to having an outside person lead your plan. It does allow all of your staff members to equally participate. If you were to use someone from within the district to lead a plan, they actually lose their voice in the process, because a good facilitator doesn't put their own thoughts into the plan. And you want your staff to be able to use the expertise that you've hired them for, right? You want them to be a part of the development and the design of it, because again, you want them to feel ownership too as they start implementation. So it does allow them to really participate at its fullest levels. We do so many plans each year with school districts that we really recognize barriers and opportunities that we see. And especially having worked with your district previously, you know, we have a little bit more of a story, right, that maybe some others wouldn't have. We respect the time demands on your district staff. We really take over the process and run it, set up all the meetings, other than a few appointments, which Amy probably would be the one charged with helping us do that, but setting those things up for us. We pretty much take on everything else. We provide invitations, the templates for all those things, press releases, and we do all the facilitation at all of the sessions that we would have. We want them being able to spend their time where we want them in their areas of responsibility. We're also a neutral third party, right? We don't have a skin in the game. Someone in the district might have an area to protect, or might have a perspective that is limited because of what role they play, what positions they may have held. And believe it or not, that being a neutral third party is really very helpful when you start asking for input and feedback from your staff especially, but from your community as well. Because they will tell us things they would never say to anyone within the district. They wouldn't say it to you, they wouldn't say it to your superintendent or any other administrator. Because there's always this fear of someone knows now how I feel. And so they know that we're not gonna tell anybody exactly what they say. We explain up front in the input sessions that you don't get back individual comments, because that's not where the important piece of the message is. It's in the aggregate of rises to the top. So they really become very comfortable then telling us how they really feel. The good and the bad, right? The ugly and the, the wonderful things. We're also not subject to FOIA like you are. So if you were to do your own survey, right, anytime the district does a survey, those results become FOIAable. And so we don't have to turn over those surveys that we do, the one that we would do online, because they belong to us. We're simply using that as the basis for information to share with the board. always some crazy comments, let's face it, if you're doing a survey, there's always gonna be somebody who puts in some, names, people, that sort of thing. You don't want that to happen. We just wanna make sure we get the information we need to improve the district. So those are just some benefits to using an outside facilitator. So here's what our process looks like. I will tell you that many processes are going to look somewhat similar, but we have developed some pieces and parts in here specifically for school districts, right? 'Cause that's the only folks we really work with, right? Other than an occasional community college or a nonprofit association, our primary work is with school boards, and so this process has actually been developed very specifically for local boards. So we're gonna walk through each of these categories very quickly. So the first is the pre-planning phase. That's what we're doing right now, right? You've had a chance to look at the proposal. I'm here to have a conversation with you. Obviously, if the board decides to move forward with us, then we would have some further conversation with your superintendent and board president, just making sure that we're all very clear about the scope of the process, and then start moving forward with planning dates for things, and also including you in the process of selecting 5 reference districts. So if any of you have seen the old documentation from the plan last time, we choose 5 districts from which to see data from. And so we use Munetrics. I don't know if you use Munetrics.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so they're our primary source for data, and so we'll pull data sets from not only your district, but these other 5 districts. And we have some criteria that we use, things we have found very useful over the years, things like free and reduced lunch percentages, special ed population, obviously your foundation grant, your size, your enrollment numbers, and there's some other things that we look for. And what we're looking to do is find districts who are most like you in as many ways as we can, because we want to try and get as close to apples comparison as we can. But then we also look at some other anomalies. Are you losing students to districts near you? Or are you gaining students from districts around you? Well, if you think they're one of those in the case, then we might want to take a look at those districts to see, are students leaving or coming for perceived differences or reality, right? And so we pull all that data together, so you would have comparison data for those 5 districts. You would also have your own trend data in many areas, right? Because depending on the district, and each district is unique, the story might be in the trend data, or the story might be in the comparison data. And that comparison data also helps us to identify areas that we can learn from, right? If we have pretty much everything very similar in makeup, and yet either we're doing just, crazy better than them, or they're just getting results that we haven't seen, well, let's have some conversation about that. What can we learn? And if it's our data, how do we use that in other areas? If it's their data, we still have something to learn, right? And so it's very helpful to take a look at those other districts and see what they have to offer us for information. So that's all part of the pre-planning. Once that's done, we move into the actual analysis and needs assessment phase. So this is where we're going to collect all this data. So we're going to do the qualitative or perceptual data. That's that input. We usually come out and do approximately 10 input sessions. Usually the first one is with the board, so that you can see exactly what we do, and how we might move forward depending upon the various groups we work with. Sometimes the methodology is slightly different, just because the numbers are different. But we would work with you on your own input session. And then the other input sessions would be with your administrative team, usually a couple of different opportunities for your staff. We would want to meet with some middle school and high school students. And I say middle school very specifically. They didn't used to be part of our process, but as I said, we're always looking to improve it. And I showed up at the district one time where it was a combined middle school, high school, and there was some miscommunication. So when I walked into the room expecting to see 18 high schoolers, I had 18 middle schoolers, most of them boys. And I panicked just for a second, but I had 3 sons. I figured I could make it through the hour. What we they are a font of information. Middle schoolers are paying attention to everything, right? They know what they didn't like or like, you know, in the past few years, right, in their elementary years. They're always looking forward ahead. And no one has taught them to have a filter yet. High schoolers learn to have filters, right? And so the information that we garner from those middle schoolers has really been very eye-opening, and they are usually right on. Like, it's amazing how well they have the district backed. So, it was a happy mistake, and after that, we decided to keep them in the process all the time. And so they're a main component. We'll also do community sessions. We'll talk with your superintendent about, are there other partner groups that you would want us to meet with? Do you have a district-wide parent council or leadership, union leaders, whatever the groups might be. And again, every district's a little bit different in their makeup and how they work with other organizations, and so we work that out. We will also do an electronic survey, exact same questions, doesn't matter how you participate. I will tell you that probably about 2/3 of your input will come from the electronic survey. The number used to be much lower before COVID, but since then, people are just very comfortable about going online and providing their input that way. Now, we still like to hold the input sessions in person because it sends a message to the community and your staff that meeting with them and hearing them is important to you. And it's also an opportunity for us to get to press for clarity. When they fill out the online survey, all we get is what they wrote, right? And sometimes that leaves us to have to interpret some things. But when they're in the room with us and they make a comment, we can say, tell us a little bit more about that. What did you mean by that, right? So we get a little bit more information from them. So again, about 2/3 though will come from that electronic survey. We also hold a virtual session or two at the end, kind of like a makeup for everybody. Obviously, we didn't used to do those before COVID either, but we learned that some folks, although they want to talk to people, they don't necessarily want to come in, right? And so we want to give them every opportunity to share their feedback about the district. So then I mentioned that other data, that hard data, those reference districts and your trend data. So we collect the data in pretty much these 4 areas. So demographics and enrollment, student achievement, finances, and personnel. And like I said, most of that data comes from metrics, but we have some other sources that we use as well for some of the data that we found useful. So your facilitator is going to take all that information, right? The qualitative and the quantitative, because you need both pieces to tell a complete story for the district. And we would come together with a planning team retreat where we would hope that all of you would participate. Normally we ask for a total of around 45 people. And we usually work with the superintendent to identify who those 45 should be, but we do like all the board to participate. We want you to have an opportunity to have some really good proactive conversation with staff and community members in an appropriate setting. And so it's a full day, 8 hours. If we do our job right, you feel 2 things at the end of the day. You feel exhausted because we worked really hard, and 2, you feel exhilarated because you feel really good about the work and the conversations that took place that day. These are just some of the activities that happen throughout the day, because it's not a sit and get day. It's interactive all day long, but good deep conversations with your colleagues and your community. This is where we'll present that data and use it to help us formulate a plan. From there, oftentimes that's where most strategic planning processes end. You identify a mission, a vision, belief statements, and goal statements, which we would do in that retreat, and then they hand you back the plan and say, good luck with that. And what we found is that districts need just a little bit more support to sort of push you off the block, to get you to move. Because what we don't want to have happen is that you take all of this time and effort and energy of people, and then it just becomes a project that sits on a shelf. Because then those community and staff members are going to say, see, I don't know why they bothered to include us, they didn't do anything with it anyway. So it's really important to make sure that we get that plan started right away. And so we come back and we work with some key staff members. This is our implementation planning meeting. It's about a 5-hour meeting. We work with the superintendent to identify the folks who should be in the room. Now, there won't be any community and there won't be any board members in the room, because we moved from what we want, which is board work, right? That's what we do at the retreat, to how we're gonna get it done, which is staff work. And so your superintendent normally identifies somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 18 people, likely those who are gonna be charged with implementation responsibilities, and then some key leaders in the district. There might be a union rep there, there could be, subject area representatives. It really is just, again, the unique makeup of your district, of who's gonna be in there. But most of the time, it's likely those folks who are gonna have those responsibilities for moving the plan forward. This is where we take the great big, oh my gosh, here's this wonderful vision, but now what? And we start breaking it down into manageable bite-sized pieces, right? So we identify what the first year objectives are gonna be, we calendar them out, we do action plans for them. This is where we overlay it to MyKIP, and we start using some of the very same tools that your district is already using in MyKIP to identify the types of data we'd be looking for and the types of measurements we would expect, those kinds of conversations. And then, at the end of that, we usually have some conversation with the district personnel around what does monitoring for the board look like? How often, and to what depth do we bring the information back so that you're getting regular updates? And then we talk about communications, because one of the things we have learned over time is that there are times that districts get really good at communications, and there are times when communications maybe isn't as strong. Now, I see you've got a bond issue thing going out here, right? So districts usually get really good during those campaigns about communicating. But just like a bond campaign, it's important for you to let people know this plan is moving forward. That this is something that they invested their time and energy in. And so we're gonna talk to the district about how do you keep everybody informed in its progress? Because it's more than just you knowing it, it's your community as well. Again, they wanna make sure that what they've invested in is moving, and not just the next thing that they're gonna outweight, right? Which is sometimes what we'll hear from staffs. Oh, this is just the next thing. This happens every so often. We just outweight it. No, there's not gonna be outweighting this. We're gonna move it forward from day one. Then we moved into the final phase, which is documentation. This is where we're gonna provide you with all the documentation from the plan. We're gonna give you all of the work product that was done the day of the retreat. You'll have all the work product that was developed at the implementation meeting, so you have all that good thinking to carry you through over the next 3 to 5 years, which is the life of the plan. And then we're also gonna give you a full summary document about what the plan looking like and all of the outcomes from it. And then we'll also give you what we call our one-pager. Some of you may have seen it the last time around. It's like a quick PR document that you can turn around the very next day after approval and send it out to the entire community and say, here's what the board approved. Thank you so much for participating in the plan. We look forward to your continued participation and support as we move forward. It's ready for you to do that the next day. We would expect that you would adopt the plan, just like we want you to adopt the process up front. Here's your opportunity now to adopt the plan and tell the community just how important this work really is. And then we're gonna talk to you about monitoring progress, because honestly, even though you have pieces and parts of activities throughout the development of it, your most important responsibility of a plan is to make sure it moves forward. So that monitoring is critical to making sure that it gets done. Because we know what gets monitored gets done, right? And then we're gonna talk to you about annual renewals. It's an option where, you can choose to bring us back in to work with the staff again at that 1-year base timeline. Take a look at what was successful, what challenges we experienced in that first year, and put together that second year set of objectives and develop those out. But that's not a necessity. Many districts choose to do that work on their own, but we offer that service here's what a timeline could look like. Garth and I didn't really talk about, the timeline and when you wanted to start this, so I just sort of captured this one for fall. Here we are discussing it this evening. Depending upon how soon we would choose to move forward with the plan. We like to hit the ground running with school starting. I mean, you have more people paying attention to everything you send out right now than you ever will the rest of the year, right? And so we like to take advantage of that, sending out the information pieces and the invitations to get them to come and participate in the process. It's when we'll start doing that data collection and getting all of those pieces ready for you. And then probably in late October, early November is when we could look at potentially having a retreat that early. Again, it just depends on how quickly we were to get started. But you should be able to have a planning retreat and likely the implementation meeting before the holidays. Now, I get that there's a lot of holidays in the fall in Michigan. And I don't know about you guys, but in some districts, hunting is a holiday too. And so we have to work around that one too. But it just means that we have to be really deliberate, right, about getting dates set so that we don't, because you don't want to drag on too long. We want it to keep their interest and their attention span. Let's get the work done while we have that, and then we'll move on to that implementation work. And you should be able to have approval of the plan by January, which is perfect because you begin your budget work for next year, right about that time, right? So you'll know what your main initiatives are going to be for the upcoming year, so that it can be built into the budget process, so that you have the biggest opportunity to have the greatest influence on next year's process. As I said, there's included things, templates for press releases and invitations, meeting updates. We know that, there's a little bit of time between when we'll see you first and then when we won't see you again until retreat. So we provide the superintendent with updates about how many, sessions we've held, how many people have participated online, and the input, those kinds of things, so that we're keeping you aware of where you are in the process and making sure that we're getting the word out and having you help us get the word out. Because that's another place where board members really can be very helpful, is encouraging others to participate. So, your role throughout the process, as I mentioned, first to approve moving forward with the strategic plan, then to provide input yourself, because your voice is just as equally as important as the others in the community. I mentioned that encouraging participation. The sheer fact that you would ask somebody to participate and tell them how important it is for them, that you want this input, that you're reaching out to your community and staff, will actually raise the likelihood that they will actually do it. Suggest participants for the planning retreat. As I mentioned, the facilitator would work with the superintendent to determine the final group, but by all means, you all have folks that you know and think might be someone good in the room that day to help us determine what the future looks like. Again, we want you to participate in the retreat. And then the most important pieces, adopting the plan so that everybody understands its importance, and then monitoring that progress. There's a lot of roles, but not a lot of extra time on your part. It might look like a lengthy list, but you're already doing some of this work. It's just a matter of being more deliberate about how we put it together so that your community knows what you're doing and why. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions